right, good evening, everybody. It's Nate G here, along with Dr. Doug Lisle. Dr. Lisle, how are you doing this fine evening?
Good. How you doing?
Not too bad. It's a little bit warm down here, but for all of our listeners who want to listen to us live, we broadcast live from www.blogtalkradio.com/beatyourgenes. That's how you can listen to us live. But for everybody else, you can listen to us on the podcast app, any podcast app that you have. So, Dr. Lisle, we've got a couple of questions today, and we had a lot of people emailed me actually after last show about the 10 paid dates questions that we had. So I thought that we would continue on a little bit on going to talk about what men look for women and what women look for in men. And today's question just has to do with what men look for in women. Now, in previous podcasts, what listeners heard is that you were saying that male psychology looks at the physical attraction first, and then that's basically what catches the guy's eye. And so this is the question that the listener had. Oh, and by the way, and whereas women, they're looking for attractiveness physically, but what factors into their equation quite a bit is the person's character and their personality and their ability to provision resources towards the female.
Sure.
So, Dr. Lisle, you've explained that previously in heterosexual mating, men are judged, like women, primarily on physical attractiveness. But unlike women, their other skills are also important, such as the ability to provide resources. So the question is, have researchers found any extra things that make women attractive to men? This listener personally thinks that they find women extra attractive if they are intelligent or caring, and also find a bit of physical strength attractive too. If a woman's a 7, then being physically fit kind of bumps her up way to an 8.5 or a 9 to me. Am I unusual? It seems to make evolutionary sense to me that women should be able to add value with extra skills in mating. Are there any reasons why this is not the case?
Great question. Really good question. And so a complete answer on this is going to take us a little bit away. We're going to wander off, and then we're going to come back, and we're going to try to put this all in perspective. This reminds me of one of my earliest and biggest aha moments in my life. My good friend Alan Goldhammer had basically had health figured out in our early 20s. He had read the works of a flaming evangelist chiropractor by the name of Herbert Shelton, who had a system of thinking about health called natural hygiene. And despite the fact that Shelton was, disagreeable and a little bit of a whack job, the truth is that he was right. And essentially, Shelton wouldn't have quite put it this way because he didn't quite have the language, but essentially he was thinking in terms of the theory of evolution. And his thinking was that it's essentially very difficult to beat the evolutionary programming that's in the system to cause health, and that the idea is that health results from healthful living, etc. Now, let me tell you why this is relevant to this question. As Alan and I were talking, I remember the conversation, so we're going back 35 years. And I was trying to understand which foods were good for you and which foods weren't good for you. And as we kept discussing this, he had this principle that he was trying to get across, and I finally got it. And I finally said, okay, what you're saying is there's no such thing as a food that's good for you. What there is that there's foods that have different degrees of how this tracks from your health. He says yes. So this is the appropriate way to think about health and food and exercise or anything else under the sun, is that there is the genetic code has a limit, and that there would be a theoretical perfect set of inputs that you could put into that system that would optimize its health, for example, and longevity. And any alteration from that perfect set of inputs would detract from the organism's health. There's no such thing as adding to its health. Okay, now, that gets to be important. There's a lot of people that are philosophically kind of not there, even in the hyper health arena that I live in. So we've got a lot of doctors and writers that are thinking, oh, well, this particular food is good for you because it has this or that substance in it. That's an incorrect way of thinking. I'm not going to say it's categorically incorrect, because it may be true that if someone has a bizarre, has a pathology, then it could be that some particular isolated nutrient in a food might have a pharmacological effect that might be useful. But this is not what we're talking about here. In principle, a grape is not better for you than an apple, and kale is not better for you than a steamed potato. All of these things meet criteria for not doing damage to the organism. And so it isn't that we're looking to add something to make it more. We are having something that suffices the organism's genetically built needs, and therefore we can either if we have something like a French fry that actually has materials in it that do damage, now we have subtracted from your health. So there would be potentially an infinite bunch of combinations of different healthy foods that you could eat, and no one set would be superior to some other set. But if we add something that is destructive, then we have subtracted from the organism's health. Okay? This is analogous to the question that the person is asking here. So the person is asking, can we add something to someone's presentation that makes them fancier? The answer is no, you cannot. Okay, so let's look carefully at how it is that we're going to think about this. You have evidence of physical flaw is going to be chipping away at a person's attractiveness. So deviations from species prototype, nose too big, feet too big, hands too small, too tall, too short, whatever the hell it is, okay? In other words, deviations from prototype are going to be subtracting little bits. Now, if we look at personality characteristics, we're going to talk about personality characteristics and mental, and as well as knowledge and abilities inside the individual, as well as ecological circumstances, i.e. how nice their family is, how what their financial situation is, etc. There's a whole host of characteristics that it isn't that if you have something good there that it adds to your attractiveness. What it does is it fails to subtract from attractiveness. Okay? What's being suggested here by the person is thinking that we can add to somebody's point. Okay? No, you can't. All you can do is fail to subtract points. So a person who is a 7 for attractiveness, they are a 7 for their attractiveness. And if that does not meet your personal threshold, let's suppose you're a 9, and that 7 does not meet your aesthetic threshold, then they're not going to meet your aesthetic threshold. That what's going to happen is, if you're a female, you may not know if that 7 meets the aesthetic threshold for a while, because it turns out that females have a guarding device on their sexual impulses. Essentially, they have a protective mechanism that reduces their impulsivity, so that they don't make an impulsive, expensive biological decision. However, after they get to know that person, and they have scoped the insides of that person's mind and character, that 7 male may meet criteria, or he may not meet criteria. But what didn't happen is that he didn't add points if it turns out he has a great mind and great character. All he did was not have any of his possible sex appeal have it be subtracted. Okay? So this is, now you might say, well, this is kind of a are we talking about semantics here? And maybe we are, because in fact, part of the situation here is where do you stand relative to competitors? And so in that case, if you have better chops, in other words, better brains, personality, and circumstances than competitors, then in effect, as someone gets to know you, you are rising relative to competitors. But I actually don't think that that's what's happening. My intuition tells me that in fact what there is that an individual, let's say our girl is a 9. That girl has inside of her head a range of acceptance for males with specific characteristics. I don't think that's going to change. What's going to happen is that she doesn't know what that range is, because in order for her to know what that range is, she also has to know what their personality characteristics are. So we know if she meets a 10, she doesn't hardly give a damn about what the personality characteristics are, because she's being overloaded with positive data, and she may be in weak knees delta. If she meets a 9 and he superficially seems like he's okay, then she's also very interested. If she meets an 8, she has her jets are cooled down, but she might be moderately interested. And as she finds out that there's no flaws on the inside that she can see, and he's starting to prove his strengths, she may relatively quickly find out that he meets criteria. If it turns out that he's a 7, she may find out after working side by side with him on 6 months under stressful circumstances and finding heroic and terrific capabilities and character, she may discover that he in fact meets criteria. And she may work with someone else who's a 6.8, does all the same things at equal stellar level, and does not meet criteria. So I don't believe you can add. And I think the concept of adding as a result of brains and personality is fundamentally flawed in the same way that my doctor friends think that if you eat, juicy red berries, that this is going to be more helpful for you than if you eat berries that aren't quite as juicy and aren't quite as red. The truth of the matter is that those are fundamentally flawed ideas. And my good friend Larry Gitlin, who's got a genius for distilling a high concept, calls this the myth of inner beauty. So the myth of inner beauty is that you can add, and the truth is that I don't believe that you can. So this person talking about, what can a woman do to add? The answer is she can't do anything to add. What she can do is she can reduce the likelihood of having points subtracted. But we're not going to find that it's going to work quite the same way for males and females. So if a female doesn't meet looks criteria pretty quickly, pretty obviously to the male, then it doesn't matter if this is Madame Curie or Mother Teresa in there, that we're not going to add points to the male's aesthetic responses. And if she doesn't meet criteria, she's probably never going to meet criteria, and it's not going to make any difference what she accomplishes or who he finds out that she is. Okay? That won't necessarily be the case for how much he might love the human. Obviously, there are other things involved in human relationships than just sex appeal. So they could become best friends, and he could think the world of her as a human being and love her, but that's not the same thing as being sexually attracted to her. So he's not going to become sexually attracted to her because he finds out that she has stellar character and great abilities, and therefore she can protect him and provide for him. Okay? That's not a variable inside of his equation for reproducing his DNA. So therefore, we're not going to see this additive function. Now, what can you do if you're a female who is attempting to try to not have points subtracted? Well, you kind of intuitively know. Be in very good physical condition, as this person has talked about. I'm not going to say that physical strength per se. The males are going to differ on that dimension about what they find physically attractive. So that's a aesthetic variable that doesn't have a unitary answer to it. So there are males that are going to like the look of females who are extremely lean, that look like these female bodybuilding competitors. I don't understand this. Those females look like they don't have enough fat on them to live through a tough winter and raise a child. And in fact, we see that their menses shut down at such low levels of fat, et cetera. So I'm not surprised that that's not typical for what males find most sexually attractive. But the notion is to be in very good physical condition, and to, do some other things that are smart, like use your conscientiousness and your intelligence to develop marketable skills, so that they would judge you as not a financial burden, and then and also to, wear nice clothes, compete with the other females with makeup and hair, etc. In other words, bring your A game. That's what you can do. But if you think that if you are below a male's threshold for sexual attractiveness and you're making $32,000 a year, that if you could just make $332,000 a year that you would qualify, you will not. Okay, that will not add points. If $32,000 a year for that male is not subtracting from his assessment, then adding $1 million a year will not add 1% to your attractiveness. So this, in the same way that if you're eating a very healthy diet, exclusively of healthy whole natural foods, if you then start to eat, that one of these doctors thinks that steamed beets has a whole bunch of extra stuff in it that's so good for you, and it correlates with lower risk of cancer. Yes, it does correlate with lower risk of cancer, because people that eat a lot of steamed beets are eating less Fritos, and ham sandwiches. So that's why it correlates. It doesn't correlate because there's something in beets that is magically superior to something in grapes, or something in lettuce, or something in turnips, or something in rice. Okay? So this is the concept of the myth of inner beauty of food, and there's also the concept of the myth of inner beauty in mating. And it's the same principle. And so this is the correct way to look at this, I believe, from my perspective. And I believe the scientific evidence tracks this quite well. But obviously nobody has tested this quite directly, so I can't prove it. But I believe the principle is sound.
Fascinating. You're reminding me of your book, The Pleasure Trap, and I remember I loved the book when I first started reading it, and the part that caught my eye the most was a chapter where you were talking about Sherlock Holmes and Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, and how he had the story of Sherlock Holmes was he was so brilliant because everyone was looking of what was there, and Sherlock Holmes was looking at what wasn't there. And the concept of everyone in health arena is trying to add things, whereas a lot of times we should be subtracting things. So very fascinating concept.
Which reminds me, we couldn't get. I'm so glad this happened to come up. This is exactly the extraordinary value of water fasting. Is that water fasting is a magnificent way for the body to restore health. And so it's all about taking everything out and letting the system restore itself. Okay, and so this is a vastly superior way to create health outcomes than anything that you could possibly concoct and add. Okay. Now, again, I'm not going to say that as a categorical statement, because if you have some raging infection and someone gives you an antibiotic, that could save your life. So we can't make it categorical, but in general, in principle, that we're going to give somebody that's got a health problem a bunch of fancy food, and that's going to reverse their heart disease? No, it's not. It's going to stop the damage from being done and allow the body to heal itself. That's all. That's what an Esselstyn or a McDougall diet or a True North diet or what Chef AJ does, et cetera. Healthy diets are not, quote, causing health. What they're doing is that they are stopping disease processes, and they're allowing the body to heal itself. And it turns out that there's an even more effective way of doing that same thing, which is water fasting. Now, isn't that ironic? We take all of the so-called fancy building blocks of health that are in the food and the magic food and the kale and the beets or the nuts or whatever it is that anybody is touting today, And it turns out we take them all out, and it completely put the person on nothing but water, and they'll get healthy way faster than any concoction that any of these doctors can come up with. Okay? And that is the truth. And that I can prove. I've got the evidence for that. And the evidence at a microbiological level is being documented right now at True North Health Center. So we have clinical outcomes already that can beat the daylights out of about anybody's data. It's not even close. And it turns out that if you can't get into True North Health Center, there's a place called fastingsafe.com run by Dr. Nate G. in Southern California. All right. Good. You got it in.
Dr. Lisle,
Let's move on.
Kind. Thank you. All right. For those of you who are curious, it's fastingescape.com.
There you go. Very good. All right, Nate. What do we got?
So our next question, now we're going to turn the compass a little bit. And instead of human mating, we're going to talk about getting along. And we've got a couple of questions on families who are fighting and not getting along very well. So Dr. Lisle, love the podcast. I'm soaking up all the information like a sponge. My question is there an effective way for family members to peacefully interact if they each have varying degrees of agreeableness, especially when dealing with narcissists? For example, if a mother-in-law tends to be narcissistic, but the daughter-in-law, who admittedly is also disagreeable, wants to keep the peace at holiday times, asking for a friend, wink, wink.
Yeah. There you go. I love that. Good for them. All right. I would say that the following is true. That there's a couple of principles here that I think that we can look to. The first principle is the concept of the disagreeable distance. So we want our lives, when there are people that are disagreeable, we want our lives to intersect with them as much as necessary for whatever critical financial or social processes are needed for us to interact with them. So we need it to be as much as necessary, but as little as possible. Okay, so that's the idea of the disagreeable distance. So we need to move our relationships with disagreeable people to the smallest possible overlap with our existence. And this isn't some theoretical, ethereal way of looking at it. We're talking about how many minutes are you going to have to interact with this person? And the answer should be the minimum. Okay, so whatever it is that we need done. Second of all, we also need to know some things about our own instincts. Our own instincts will tell us that these people are in our village and we're going to have disputes with them, and they are disagreeable, i.e., and they're unfair. And therefore, we need to correct this unfairness and negotiate and intimidate them into and educate them into seeing the world more correctly, because we're going to have to repetitively deal with them. And so this is an interesting instinct, and this instinct that we need to, in fact, I should name it. It's the false need of consensus, or the illusion of needed consensus. So we have a feeling that we need consensus, we need agreement, and the reason is that we're going to have to be dealing with these people, and they're an integral component of our lives. And so people will feel this way arguing with all kinds of people about politics or various things, or whether or not you should be on a plant-based diet or a paleo diet or an Atkins diet or whatever else under the sun. And the answer is you don't need any consensus at all. We don't need any consensus. None. All you need to optimize your life is a few friends that think similarly to you, and you're done. So when we go into these situations where we're going to wind up with a disagreeable person in there, they are operating on the same false illusion of the need for consensus. We need a better name for this. This is an important concept, so it deserves. Where's Larry?
I'm going to start Googling right now. Alliteration.
Good. Okay. So there's so the thing is, they're feeling the same thing, and they're feeling irritated that you don't see the world the way they see it, and so they also feel the need to beat you into submission So it is that you are going to vote their way at the village council, so that terrible mistakes aren't made in the village in terms of village resources and decision making that you clearly are haywire on, and you're going to make a mistake, and it's going to be costly to them and their genes. And you're such an idiot. Don't you know that we share genes? And you need to know that this is the right way we're going to do things. It could be for big global decision making for the village, or it could also be just the unfairness that you're not giving me enough esteem right now, and that's going to signal that there's going to be decision making conflicts later. Whatever it is, it's still the illusion that we need a consensus. So what I would tell you is, hey, let it go. If you've got to put up with this person for an hour and 47 minutes or 2 hours and 47 minutes before you can hit the door, then just do it. Just, flood their circuits a little bit, give them some status, and don't worry about it. Move on. And just stay away from all conflict. All you're doing there is throwing them, a couple of hours of your time. And you're doing it for a damn good reason. There better be a damn good reason you're doing it, or you shouldn't do it. Okay? You're either there because it's worth checking the little social box and making sure that we don't, that it's 2 hours invested because there's an important reason for that investment, or it's not worth the investment. If we're really supposed to be there and supposed to have a good time, and that's the purpose of this, and you're not having a good time, then we shouldn't be there. Only time we should be in these situations is that they are a necessary investment for other little tentacles and levers associated with our lives, i.e. our partner, it's their mother, and they feel like we need to put on a show that we like their mother, even though their mother's a bitch, and et cetera. Then fine. Okay, then we suck it up, and we just flatter the person, pat them on the head, say they're right, and get out. That's what we do. The last thing we need is to let our instincts, let our genes step into this mess, and then start to try to battle with them, and then try to, in a panic over the false need for consensus, then get into it. Like it's not worth the trouble. Who they vote for doesn't make a damn bit of difference to you. Shouldn't. Why should it? It's absurd. Okay? What they think about diet, what they think about religion, what they think about anything, what the hell difference does it make? The only reason it makes any difference to you is because you feel the need, the distorted need, or the illusion of the need for consensus. Okay? So you no longer live in a circumscribed village of a few people that we need to get these kinds of consensus and we need to push our point. We don't live in anything like that. We are unbelievably free of the village. So one of the problems is that we're not in touch with that. And so once we start to let that go, what other people think about anything becomes unbelievably, totally unimportant. All we need to do is make sure that we're not on the other end of some nuts bullet, that thinks that he needs to do something for some cause. Just we need to be safe, and we need to be away from other people's, bizarre anger and their insistence that we think the way they do. Just get out of it. We can be free, and it doesn't matter how haywire the world is. All right. That's how I look at that problem.
Fascinating. You just closed a couple of open loops in my head. So,
yeah. Let me continue on with this just for a second, Nate. And that is that I don't know if I've said this before. I just said this in a little webinar I did with AJ, I think yesterday, a couple days ago. And that is this concept of the limitations of your lifespan. And it's useful to, I believe it is for me, to think about your life not in terms of years or even in months, but in hours. Because hours is the level of which you make so many decisions. Your life is literally a string of decisions that are essentially how am I going to spend this hour and then how am I going to spend the next hour. It's more or less like that. And if we think about our lifespan, it's useful to try to weave our way out of what's known as the denial of death. And that is the human lack of ability to conceptualize that you're going to be dead. Like you vaguely know that you're going to be dead, but you don't really know that you're going to be dead because it just doesn't, you just don't grok it. You're not built to grok it. And it was there's been times when all of us have done this where I've sat around, I don't know, watched 3 NFL games, and at the end of it, I'm like, what the hell did I just do? I didn't really enjoy it. I'm just looking for something on TV. I don't really care about the Bengals and the Steelers, and like, why the hell did I just spend 2 hours? I mean, I haven't done this in many years, but I have done such things. And the truth is, it's a waste of time. And when you're young, you don't really think much about it. But at my age, you do. So I now know that I have, in all probability, I have lived at least 2/3 of my life. And so I also know that I've got, call it, maybe 14 hours a day of decent waking time that I'm not in the shower, brushing my teeth, or whatever, or sleeping. And so you got 14 hours a day. You got more or less 100 hours a week, more or less 5,000 hours a year, and more or less, call it in the next, 20 years, call it 100,000 hours. So if you look at your life as 100,000 hours, then here's another way to conceptualize that 100,000 hours. And that is that think of yourself as having a bank account with $100,000 in it. And every hour, there's a little buzz on your cell phone for a second that tells you that you just spent $1. And the problem is that there's no way to earn any more. It's impossible. There is no magic beet juice. There is no magic nut butter. There's nothing that can add to this 100,000 hours. It is impossible. If you eat really healthy food, exercise, go to bed on time, get sunshine, and do periodic water fasting, you may get all 100,000 hours. And you may get them in health, but you cannot get 100,001 because you're limited by your genetics as to how long you live, and you are going to die, and it is for sure. Okay? So now, if I have 100,000 hours left, then every hour that goes by, a little buzz goes, and at the end of today, I'm going to have 99,986. And then when I look at my cell phone the next day, when it's this little computational app, and it's going to be 99,972. And down it goes. They don't take them off when you sleep because we're only computing it on the hours that I'm awake, because those are the hours I'm making decisions. But every hour I'm giving up one of these precious hours, and then they're gone. Okay? Now, you can give them all up. You can, try to get everybody to believe in your religion or your politics, and you can try to save the whales, or you can do whatever the hell it is that you want. And you can do it. Okay? You can adopt 3 children from some crack addicts and try to give them the best life that you can. There's all kinds of things you can do with your time. And I'm not saying that there's a right or a wrong way to do this. What I'm saying is that there's more enjoyable ways and less enjoyable ways. There's decisions that are going to result in more enjoyment out of your existence, and there's decisions that are going to result in less. Okay? So the concept here is to try to use your time wisely. That, to me, there are going to be mistakes that are going to be made. There's going to be opportunities lost. There's no way to get around that. Even a mind that is perfectly calibrated, as perfect as possible in its decision-making, and doesn't get sucked into any traps at all, there's a certain background radiation level of mistakes. You're not going to take the 500 stocks on the S&P 500 this year and invest your money in all of your money in the one that's going to have the highest rate of return. You cannot do this. It's not possible. In other words, that would be the best investment that you could make financially in those markets, but you cannot make that investment because there's no possible way for you to figure that out. Now, you might do it, and you could gamble it all, but that would be a mistake because your odds of winning that gamble are exceedingly highly against you. Same reason you don't take your retirement fund to Vegas and put it on, 13 black. Okay, now, so you inherently are constrained by your ability to analyze the evidence in order to make the best decisions possible for your existence. You are inherently constrained by this. However, past the inherent constraints, there are simply mistakes that you could avoid. Okay? You can eat the wrong food, and had you known better, you wouldn't have done it. You wouldn't have got cancer or heart disease and died early. Okay? You can recognize that, for example, Mr. Slick over there, okay, that has a criminal record and has 3 ex-wives. Don't be wife number 4. Not a good decision. Okay? So there's ways for you to figure out how to use your time, how to make these decisions wisely so that you optimize your existence. That's what we're trying to do here at Beecher James. This is what this analysis is about. So one of the things that we're trying to do is we're trying to look for the decision-making apparati that sit inside the human mind that can be susceptible to mistakes. And one set of those mistakes is where the Stone Age environment and its design, the design of the mind in responding to the demands of the Stone Age environment, will miss opportunities in the modern environment or make mistakes in the modern environment that they don't need to make. One of those is spending time trying to convince other people or iron out conflicts between us and other people that we don't need to. That's a big mistake. So this question about how do I get along with my pain-in-the-ass mother-in-law, the answer is just smile, flatter her, and get the hell out of there. And be there at the minimum of those hours, because those 3 hours that you're there at Christmas time, a little gong goes off in your purse. Every hour, $1 got sucked out. Don't give these people hardly any of your time if you can possibly avoid it. And, a great life, a life that is close to optimal is one where the answer to that question is 0. I'm not giving any of those people any of my time. Okay, so that's the other part of the answer to that question. So if we're going to be there, there better be a damn good reason that we're there, and it's actually necessary for a lot of other values that are involved, at which point don't get sucked into the arguments at all. Don't bother. The other side of it is make damn sure we're there for reasons that we really need to be there. Because if we don't need to be there, don't give these people your life.
It's fascinating.
All right.
We've had a caller on hold. We're going to welcome caller. What's your name? Where are you calling from?
Hi, this is Greta. I'm calling from Denver.
Okay.
Well,
hi, Greta.
Good evening, Greta. Welcome to the show.
Hi. I was just listening to the podcast, and I hope this question isn't too personal, but I'm on the Beat Your Genes Facebook page, and I always watch Dr. Lisle's YouTube videos and stuff, and a lot of people have been asking, wondering why Dr. Lisle isn't on social media that much, if there's a specific reason why, and what you do in your downtime instead of being on social media.
Greta, we've never met, but I'd give you a big hug. It's a beautiful question. All right. Ironically enough, I was speaking with a good friend of mine earlier today that has a business that is where Facebook makes sense to be part of doing your marketing. So she goes to other people's Facebook page. She sees what the links are. She posts things. She posts comments. She talks to them about all this stuff about that kind of marketing interconnected process. To me, that is what we call. There's a name for this. It's called Doug Lisle hell. I mean, it is Doug Lisle hell. The concept of finding out what somebody else does or what they posted or what they say or what they think about what I post, oh my God, I'm sorry. I'm an introvert. I have no interest in any of this. So I'm actually not on Facebook. My business Facebook page is run by a good friend of mine, and so we have a deal, and So that's how that works. Okay, and she's competent enough. She knows what would go on that thing and what wouldn't go on that thing. So that's all good. Now, the answer is that I hate anything that remotely looks like social process. That's just not me. Now, what do I do in my downtime? I pet my cat, and right now I'm up in Portland, Oregon, with my good friend Dr. Alan Goldhammer. He discovered a thing called Never Too Late basketball. So Never Too Late basketball is for old geezers who want to show that they were undervalued in their youth as a player, and then they're going to beat up on some people. So Alan and I are up here licking our chops because this camp starts in a day or so, and we're going to be ready. We're going to go to the gym tomorrow. We're going to shoot. Our shots are going to be sharp, and then we're going to go out there and try to beat up on 14 other old men that have showed up from around the country for this thing. So that's what I do with my time. I'm trying to beat up on old men.
Okay.
So thank you, Greta. You bet.
Greta, thank you very much for the phone call and for calling the show. Really appreciate it.
You bet.
Wow, Dr. Lisle, I have a whole new respect for you.
Well,
at least they're older men.
Because I can manage 5 days with Alan Goldhammer. Yeah, that's respect. That's some respect. Actually, he's great fun. He is the king of sarcastic. Let me tell you, there's nobody like him. All right.
Yeah. All right. So our next question,
we have one
actually.
More,
yeah, we had one more that was right after this one about getting along, but you answered it so thoroughly. This was just a personal situation of having two grown daughters. They're not speaking to each other, and so I think we'll leave it. We'll leave it for now. If we want to go over it, we always can. But the principles are exactly the same as what you just said.
Yeah.
One quick question about positive psychology. Do we have a couple of minutes for that?
Sure.
Okay. Dr. Lisle, can you give the Doug download on positive psychology? All I know about is that it's a new branch of psychology invented in 1998, and whenever someone tells me of one of its principles, my BS radar goes off the charts now that I have some understanding of evolutionary psychology and its team dynamics.
Well, good. BS meter should go off. It's not as bad as it might be, and it's not really a bad thing. This is the guy that coined this term. He didn't really start it, but the term was coined in the late 1990s by Martin Seligman. And Seligman, I believe at the time, he was the president of the American Psychological Association. And Seligman was a legitimate researcher. He was nationally recognized researcher for his. He was actually started out as essentially a learning theorist, learning researcher, and discovered early a little event called learned helplessness, which kind of got blown out of proportion for its importance, but it was nevertheless a legitimate. He did legitimate science, and he was a professor at the University of Pennsylvania, and he and later in his career he kind of looked at things and he said, hey, we're spending an awful lot of time. He's a clinical, I believe he's a clinical, he might have even been a clinical psychologist. I think he was. I don't think he ever really saw any patients to speak of or did any work in that arena. But the field, and said that the tone or the focus of the field clinically in clinical psychology is on pathology. So, anxiety disorders, eating disorders, depression, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder. In other words, it's all disorder. And he said, this seems out of balance. That what about thinking about how it is that we increase human happiness? And so it turns out, of course, clinicians are doing that intuitively all the time. And but Seligman felt like, hey, it's not sort of formally recognized that's we ought to have research on this. We ought to be thinking about this in this direction. And so that's where positive, quote, positive psychology was born. Now, the truth is it wasn't born there. More formally, we go all the way back to Carl Rogers and Abraham Maslow and the humanistic psychologists of mid-20th century that was known as the third force. And so the behind, obviously psychoanalysis and behaviorism being the two twin pillars of 20th century psychology that dominated the field, with the psychodynamic Freudians dominating the clinical arena for most of that time, whereas learning theory was dominating academic psychology. And so those two things were like two things that never met in the middle. Like they were sort of separate spheres in the universe that didn't do much touching. The academic psychologists didn't really have a lot of use for psychodynamic thinking. They didn't really see it as a coherent theory about anything with any real testable hypotheses. And when efforts were made in that regard, they kind of flubbed around and nothing happened of any excitement. Whereas learning theories have legitimacy. Learning theories have legitimacy and and there's a history of an accretion of knowledge that took place behind the advances in science there in the 20th century. However, the positive psychology or humanistic psychology was exactly what Seligman is talking about. It was the notion of, hey, why aren't we looking to try to understand the causes of human happiness? And so there was some of the more important thinking in this area was done by Rogers, Abraham Maslow, Csikszentmihalyi, who is the father of flow theory. These are all the sort of the fundamental thinkers that were sitting underneath what eventually Seligman terms as positive psychology. So positive psychology, I don't think has any. It's not sitting on any big theoretical revolution or edifice or anything else. It's more a man's statement about shouldn't we be looking over here to try to understand positives? What things cause positives? It's not a revolution in anything. It's not a bad thing. It's just not. We're not going to get a ton of insights from something that is fundamentally theoretically nowhere. The big push forward in positive psychology will come from evolutionary theory, obviously, because evolutionary theory now we finally have a coherent understanding of the nature of motivation of all life, all animal life, and including humans. And so now with evolutionary psychology, as it specifically focuses on human nature, allows us to understand the causes of human happiness with far greater precision and starts us down a pathway towards trying to improve human decision-making so that we can cause more happiness circuits to be fired in people. So that's a fancy way of saying that we finally have a theory that works. And it's going to be, the next half a century is going to be truly the birth of positive psychology, now wedded to evolutionary biology, and therefore it finally has a place to set its lever so that it can move the human psychological world.